The early morning fog rolled in thick and low, curling like smoke across the quiet back alley of the Willow Creek Animal Shelter. It was the kind of dawn that muted the world. No bird song, no bustling traffic, just the slow whisper of a breeze, sweeping through puddles left by the night's rain. Most of the town still slept, warm in their beds, unaware that heartbreak had crept to the threshold of compassion. Inside the shelter, dim lights flickered on as Clara Hayes, the head caretaker, unlocked the main entrance with her thermos of lukewarm coffee tucked under her arm. She sighed, bracing herself for another long day. The shelter was already overcrowded, and she knew today would bring more intake, more desperation, more animals needing homes that simply didn't exist. As she pushed open the door, a chill rushed past her, more than just the weather. It felt like something was wrong. She stepped out front to collect the mail, but something in the corner of her eye made her freeze. Just by the side entrance, a door rarely used by anyone other than staff, lay a small bundle, a mess of tattered pink fleece wrapped around what looked like a shoebox. But as Clara approached, the reality hit her like a gut punch. It wasn't a box, it was a puppy. The tiny creature shivered violently, curled so tightly in the blanket that at first glance, it was difficult to tell where the fur ended and the fleece began. He was no older than 8 weeks. So fragile. His bones protruded through his thin, dirty coat, and his eyes, when they fluttered open, were dull with fear and exhaustion. And then Clara saw the note. It was scribbled hastily on a scrap of notebook, paper taped to the blanket with what looked like the last hope of someone who had nothing left to give. "I'm sorry. Please love him. I can't anymore." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen notes like this before, but somehow this one hit differently. Maybe it was the way the puppy didn't make a sound. Not a whimper, not a bark, just a resigned look that didn't belong on something so young. He had the eyes of a soul that had already known too much pain. She knelt slowly, careful not to startle him, speaking in the soft maternal voice that years of caretaking had taught her to use. "Hey, sweetheart, it's okay, you're safe now." He flinched when she reached for him, not aggressively, just the reflex of something that had never been held with love. Clara's heart shattered. She lifted him gently, wrapping the blanket. Tighter around his tiny frame, he was cold, ice cold, and far too light. Every rib was a sharp ridge beneath her hands. Back inside the shelter, Clara rushed him into the intake room, calling for Maya, the shelter's part-time vet tech who had just walked in. Maya, emergency intake, malnourished pup, abandoned. Maya's face immediately shifted from sleepy to alert. How old? 8 weeks maybe less, and he's terrified. They worked quickly. The pup's temperature was dangerously low. His blood sugar was bottomed out, his hydration critical. They set up a heating pad, wrapped him in dry towels, and gave him glucose drops to try to stabilize him. Every so often he let out the faintest cry, just a squeak, but mostly he just stared at them unblinking, watching, waiting, as if trying to understand what would come next. "Does he have a name?" Maya asked gently. Clara looked back at the note still clutched in her hand. She shook her head. "No. Just, I'm sorry." They fell silent. It was a name in itself, a sentence that carried lifetimes of pain and regret. After a few hours, and a warmed-up meal of softened puppy chow, the little guy finally began to move on his own. Just a few inches. He turned his head toward Clara's hand when she reached out this time. No flinch, no fear, just a soft sigh, as if her touch reminded him of something he once knew, or maybe only dreamed of. Clara smiled. "Well, little man, you need a name. Something strong, something full of hope." Maya chimed in from the corner. "How about Chance?" Clara paused, then nodded. "Chance. Yeah, that feels right. Chance, a name for a pup who had nothing left but the tiniest spark of hope, left alone on a doorstep in the dead of night." By late afternoon, Chance had made progress. He'd kept down 2 small meals, his temperature had stabilized, and he had managed to lift his head, resting it gently against Clara's arm. It was the first sign of trust, and it lit up the staff like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Clara sat with him long after her shift ended, stroking his ears and telling him stories about the other animals, about the people who came to adopt, about the life he was going to have. "You've got a whole world waiting for you, baby boy," she whispered. "We'll find you someone who won't ever say goodbye." But even as she spoke, her eyes wandered to the crumpled note, now pinned to the intake board. The guilt in those words lingered, haunting the air. "I'm sorry." Clara couldn't help but wonder what had led someone to that moment. Was it poverty? Abuse? Mental illness? Had the person cried after walking away? Or had they run? Did they love Chance, despite leaving him? There were no answers, only questions and the broken pieces of a puppy left behind. That night, after the shelter quieted and the lights dimmed, Clara returned to the intake room with a fresh fleece blanket. She placed it gently over Chance, now fast asleep in his crate, his tiny body finally resting without shivering. He looked peaceful, safe. She whispered, "I don't know who gave up on you, sweetheart, but I promise, we won't." And with that vow, a new chapter began. One forged not in abandonment, but in resilience. A story born from the ashes of heartbreak, now ignited by the flicker of hope. The shelter office was quiet that morning, but something felt different. A hum in the air, as if the silence itself was bracing for news. Janet, the assistant manager of Willow Creek Animal Shelter, carried a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. She was halfway through her morning checks when she heard it again, the soft whimpering coming from just beyond the double doors at the back entrance. Curiosity turned into urgency. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, stepping into the crisp air that had yet to be warmed by the sun. Her eyes immediately fell upon the crate, the same one brought in just hours earlier by Marlene. The puppy inside had curled into a tight ball, nose tucked under its trembling body, the same threadbare blanket draped loosely over its back. But this time, the blanket was no longer what drew Janet's attention. It was the folded scrap of paper resting beside it. Janet knelt carefully, heart tightening in her chest. She picked up the note, her fingers trembling slightly, and unfolded it with the delicacy of someone handling something sacred. It wasn't long, barely a few lines, written in hurried strokes with smudged ink. But it didn't need to be long to carry the weight it did. "I'm so sorry. I love him, but I can't take care of him anymore. Please find him a home that will. He deserves better. His name is Benny." That was it. No signature, no contact information. Just the raw, aching confession of someone who had made an impossible choice. Janet stood there frozen for a moment, eyes fixed on the last two words. "I'm sorry." She glanced down at the little puppy again. Benny. Now he had a name on the shelter. Had seen many drop-offs over the years, some angry and callous, others desperate and grief-stricken. But this one hit differently. There was something about the careful tuck of the blanket, the neat handwriting fighting through the tremble. And that name, that simple, affectionate name, that whispered of love, not neglect. And that made it all the more heartbreaking. As Janet carried the note inside, she tried to picture the person who had left him. A young woman with nowhere to go, an elderly person whose health had failed, a family torn by circumstances beyond their control. The note gave no clues, but the emotion within it lingered like a shadow in the hallway. She handed it to Marlene, who read it silently, then exhaled a breath that seemed to carry the weight of the person who wrote it. Back in the kennel, Benny stirred slightly, lifting his head when Marlene approached. His dark eyes scanned her face, with a mixture of longing and confusion, as if trying to understand why the hands that used to feed and pet him were suddenly gone. "He's grieving," Janet said quietly. "Not just scared, he knows something's changed." Marlene nodded. "They always do." They didn't move him right away. Instead, they let him rest where he was, with his blanket, and the faint scent of the one who had left him. Routines were critical at shelters, feeding times, cleaning schedules, medical checkups. But Benny's schedule was going to be different for now. He needed time. Over the next few days, shelter volunteers approached him with care. Some brought soft treats, others spoke gently from outside the kennel, and one even sat nearby reading aloud in a soft voice, just so Benny wouldn't feel so alone. But he rarely moved. The only sign of life came at night when the staff would peek in to find him curled tighter than before, as though trying to keep himself from vanishing. And still that note sat taped to the whiteboard in the office. Every time a staff member passed it, their eyes lingered just a moment too long. One volunteer, a college student named Nina, began spending extra time with Benny. "Hey, buddy," she'd whisper each time she visited, sitting cross-legged beside his crate. "I don't know who left you, but I know they didn't stop loving you. Maybe they were scared, or sick, or broke, or all of it. But you're not alone anymore." Sometimes she'd bring a different blanket, softer, newer, but Benny always sniffed and retreated to the old one. The fabric was frayed, faded in places, and didn't smell like detergent. It smelled like home. Nina didn't force the change. She simply folded the new blanket nearby, creating a little pile of comfort for when Benny was ready. "You don't have to forget them," she told him, gently. "But maybe we can add to your story, write a new chapter." One afternoon, Marlene entered with a small bowl of warm chicken and rice, something they prepared for underweight or traumatized dogs. She handed it to Nina, who carefully placed it just outside Benny's reach. The puppy opened his eyes. He sniffed, hesitant, moved forward, an inch, then another, until his front paw grazed the edge of the bowl. He paused there, glancing up at Nina, who stayed absolutely still, her breath caught in her chest. Then Benny took a bite. It was a small moment, but for Nina and the entire shelter staff watching from around the corner, it was monumental. Benny had chosen to trust, even if just for a second, and that meant the healing had begun. The blanket was washed a few days later, gently, by hand. It was a risk. Nina knew that taking the scent away could distress Benny, but it was time. The next morning, when Benny saw it draped freshly over his bed, he sniffed cautiously. Then, as if understanding the gesture, he curled into it again, not as tightly as before. Day by day, the sadness in Benny's eyes began to loosen its grip. He started to sit up when Nina came by. He took treats from the hand instead of waiting for them to be placed down. Eventually, he wagged his tail, just once, a shy little flutter of hope. But it was enough to make Nina burst into quiet tears. And always, there was the note, taped to the wall, unread by Benny, but felt in every moment of his recovery. "I'm sorry." It wasn't just an apology. It was an unspoken plea for forgiveness, for peace, for a second chance that life couldn't give, but maybe love could. And slowly, Benny was learning to accept it. The ride home was quiet. Kara drove slowly, glancing every so often at the passenger seat where Teddy sat wrapped in his familiar blanket, tucked gently inside a small crate. His big, soulful eyes didn't wander. He didn't try to paw at the cage or bark at passing cars. He simply stared forward, like the world had become something too vast and unfamiliar to process. Kara's heart twisted every time she looked at him. "Just one night," she whispered, half to herself, half to him. "Just one night to remind you that people can still be kind." The moment they arrived at her small cottage on the edge of town, Kara gently carried the crate inside. Her home smelled of cinnamon and books, warm and cozy with scattered blankets and framed photographs of dogs she'd rescued over the years. The fireplace crackled softly, casting an orange glow across the hardwood floors. She placed Teddy's crate in the living room, unlatched the door, and stepped back. He didn't move. Kara sat down on the couch, making herself as still and unthreatening as possible. She resisted the urge to call him or coax him with food. Instead, she simply waited, understanding that healing often started with silence. After nearly 15 minutes, Teddy shifted. Slowly, cautiously, he placed one tentative paw outside the crate, then another. His movement was barely audible, his fragile body making almost no sound as he stepped onto the soft rug. His nose twitched, catching the scent of Kara's home, of warmth and food and other dogs who'd found sanctuary here. "Hey there, buddy," Kara said softly, keeping her eyes gentle and her voice low. Teddy didn't approach. He walked past her, his tail low, head down, as if still unsure whether this new place was just another stop before another goodbye. Kara let him explore. He sniffed the leg of the coffee table, the corner of a throw pillow, the edge of the kitchen, doorway. Each object seemed to hold a question. Will this hurt me? Will this leave too? Eventually, he made his way back to the crate and laid down again, not inside it, but just beside it, still close to what he knew, but a little braver than before. That night, Kara lay on the couch with a pillow and a blanket, not wanting to leave him alone in the dark. Teddy didn't bark or cry, but she sensed his sadness thick in the room like fog. Every few minutes, she'd glance over to find him watching her, eyes wide, not with trust, but with the kind of hope that can't afford to bloom too soon. At 2 a.m., she woke to the sound of soft whimpers. Teddy was pacing in small, anxious circles. She sat up slowly. "Nightmare?" she asked gently. She moved to the kitchen and returned with a shallow bowl of warm chicken broth. She placed it a few feet from him and stepped back. Teddy sniffed the air, looked at her, and, after several long seconds, approached the bowl. He drank carefully, lips barely parting as if fearing even the food might be a trick. It wasn't much, but it was something. A beginning. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains. Kara woke with a crick in her neck, but she smiled when she saw Teddy curled up on the rug, blanket half draped over him like a security net. She walked to the kitchen, quietly brewed coffee, and prepared a small breakfast. Scrambled eggs, a spoonful of rice, and some softened kibble. She placed the bowl near Teddy and took a seat on the floor back against the couch. Teddy lifted his head. This time he didn't hesitate as long. He stood, stretched his slender legs, and walked toward the bowl. He sniffed, then looked up at Kara. Their eyes met for a moment that lingered, an unspoken conversation exchanged through silence. "Thank you. You're safe." He began to eat, and Kara felt her throat tighten. For a puppy who hadn't known what trust felt like in weeks, maybe months, this was a victory. The phone rang, breaking the peaceful moment. It was Thomas. "Well?" he asked. Kara hesitated. He ate a little, walked around, slept next to his crate. Thomas chuckled. "You sound like a proud parent." She laughed lightly, but it ended in a sigh. "I can't bring him back today." There was a pause. "I figured." "I'm not saying I'll keep him," she added quickly. "I just think he needs more time." "Kara," Thomas said gently, "you're not just giving him more time. You're giving him his first chance." She hung up, placed the phone on the counter, and looked back at Teddy, who was now sniffing the bookshelf, tail no longer tucked completely between his legs. There was a flicker of curiosity in him, a fragile seed of healing. That afternoon, Kara took him out to the backyard. It was enclosed, grassy, with a few chew toys and a small wading pool. Teddy stepped cautiously onto the grass. The sun hit his fur, revealing the reddish tinge of old scars hidden beneath the white. But even with his visible wounds, he looked stronger than he had just 12 hours ago. He sniffed a toy, then picked it up and dropped it, unsure of what came next. Kara knelt down nearby, pretending not to watch too closely. Eventually, Teddy walked over and sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she felt the subtle hum of connection forming. When it was time to return to the shelter, Kara hesitated at the door. Teddy, sensing something, stood alert near the crate. His body stiffened, eyes locked on her, confusion seeping in. "No," she whispered. "Not yet." She sent a message to Thomas. "He's staying a little longer." That night, Teddy walked to her side and rested his chin on her foot. Kara didn't move. She just let him stay there, both of them breathing into a quiet that felt like the first steps of belonging. He was beginning to believe. And that, more than anything, was the miracle of one night. The morning sun filtered softly through the large windows of the animal shelter, casting golden patches of light across the clean tiled floor. For the first time in weeks, the shelter felt different, warmer somehow, even welcoming. Ellie, now affectionately known among the staff as Hope, lay curled in a corner of her kennel, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The small pink blanket she'd arrived with was tucked beneath her chin like a child's security toy. Her eyes, though still cautious, no longer held the wild, panicked gleam of a creature who believed the world had forsaken her. Progress had been slow, agonizingly so, but it was happening. Maggie sat cross-legged just outside Hope's kennel, as she had every morning since the puppy's arrival. She brought a folding chair at first, but eventually ditched it in favor of sitting on the cold ground. It made her feel closer, more human in the eyes of the fragile creature watching her. A paperback novel rested on her lap, mostly ignored. Her true purpose wasn't reading, it was presence. Hope didn't like to be touched yet, didn't tolerate loud noises or sudden movements. But she watched. Oh, how she watched. "She's studying you," Caleb, the head trainer, remarked one morning with a knowing smile. "That's how they learn to trust. By watching you, not when you speak, but when you're quiet. When you just stay." Today, Maggie brought with her a new toy, a small soft elephant with floppy ears and stitched eyes. She held it up slowly, allowing Hope to see it clearly, then gently set it down a few inches from the metal gate. "Hey there, sweetheart," Maggie said softly. "I thought you might like a friend. He's good at keeping secrets just like you." Hope's ears perked slightly at the sound of Maggie's voice. She didn't move toward the toy, but she didn't retreat either. It was a win, however minor. In the following days, Hope's progress became the gentle rhythm of the shelter's heartbeat. Each little step was a celebration. The way she sniffed the toy elephant one evening when no one was looking, how she began to sit up when Maggie approached, or the moment she licked water from a bowl placed just a few inches closer to the gate. These subtle triumphs were the foundation of healing, and Maggie understood the importance of each one. One Thursday afternoon, the shelter experienced a rare moment of silence. Most of the staff had stepped out for a meeting, and the usual chorus of barking was muted by naps and tired tails. It was then that Maggie decided to try something new. She opened Hope's kennel door, very slowly, and sat just inside, her body still and unthreatening, her gaze lowered. She didn't expect Hope to come forward, but after what felt like an eternity of tense stillness, the tiny white pup inched forward. Not boldly, not with the bounce she might have had in a different life, but with trembling curiosity. She sniffed the hem of Maggie's jeans, then retreated, eyes wide and waiting for punishment that never came. Maggie remained still, heart thudding so loud she was sure Hope could hear it. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. From that moment on, the connection between them deepened. Hope began to associate Maggie with comfort, with consistency, with calm. When thunderstorms rolled through the town, each rumble a trigger from the night she was abandoned, Maggie would sit with her for hours, humming lullabies and laying her hand palm up, never forcing contact. Sometimes Hope would press her nose into it, and once she even climbed into Maggie's lap, shaking but present. Maggie didn't cry until Hope fell asleep there, her little body finally at rest. But perhaps the most pivotal moment came one Saturday afternoon when Maggie decided to bring Hope outside. They didn't go far, just to a small, enclosed yard. Behind the shelter, fenced and grassy, where sunshine poured down like forgiveness. Hope hesitated at the doorway, paws frozen on the threshold. The world outside her kennel was too vast, too unpredictable. "It's okay," Maggie whispered. "Just try. I'm right here." She stepped out first, leaving the door wide open, crouching a few feet away with her arms gently outstretched. Hope lingered, quivering with uncertainty, the breeze ruffling her fur. Then slowly her paws crossed the threshold. The first few steps were halting, unsure. She sniffed the grass, flinched at a bird's distant cry, and looked over her shoulder more than once to be sure the door remained open. Maggie didn't coax, didn't lure, just waited. And then, Hope ran. It wasn't fast or graceful, more of a staggering trot, but it was movement. Freedom. She ran a few feet, then turned and looked at Maggie, tail flicking once in the air. Maggie laughed, softly, joyfully, and opened her arms wider. Hope ran straight to her. From that moment on, the dam had cracked. The puppy who had arrived, cloaked in sorrow, was beginning to play, to engage, to dream. The once muted light in her eyes began to sparkle just a little, each day brighter than the last. As the shelter prepared for their annual open adoption event, Maggie had a decision to make. Hope was healing, yes, but the idea of letting her go felt impossible. Her story had become more than a rescue. It was a bond, a promise. Late one evening, after everyone had gone home, Maggie sat beside Hope's kennel, a small folder in her hands. "Hope," she whispered, stroking the now fluffy fur behind the pup's ears. "I filled out the adoption papers today. If you'll have me, I want to be your forever." Hope tilted her head, then gently licked Maggie's fingers. It was all the answer she needed. The sun rose gently over the sleepy town, painting the sky in hues of gold and peach as morning dew sparkled across blades of grass like tiny stars. For most, it was just another Saturday. But for Maggie and the little white puppy she named Hope, it was a new beginning. Today wasn't just an ordinary day at the shelter. Today, Hope was going home. Maggie arrived early, her heart fluttering with a strange mixture of excitement and reverence. Clutched in her hands was a red collar, stitched with the name Hope in soft white lettering. It wasn't just a collar, it was a symbol of everything they'd been through together. From the trembling, abandoned bundle on the shelter steps, to the cautious puppy who dared to trust again, Hope had come so far. And now she was ready to step into a new life. As Maggie walked into the familiar hallway of the shelter, she passed the line of kennels that had once echoed with Hope's frightened whimpers. Each cage was a chapter in someone's story. Some endings were joyful, others weren't. But Maggie knew as she reached Hope's kennel and saw that little tail wagging wildly, that this ending would be one worth remembering forever. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly, kneeling as Hope eagerly pressed against the bars, her paws scratching at the door with excited urgency. "Are you ready?" Hope let out a small bark. Just one. A sound of life, of anticipation. Maggie opened the door, and Hope leapt into her arms like a child running into their mother's embrace. She no longer trembled. She didn't look back. Maggie fastened the collar gently around Hope's neck and clipped on a lightweight leash. It was more ceremonial than necessary. Hope would follow her anywhere now. As they exited the shelter's main doors, a few staff members gathered quietly at the entrance. They'd all followed Hope's journey from frightened stray to hopeful companion. More than one person wiped away tears as Maggie carried her out. "Take care of her," Caleb said with a smile, patting Hope's head. "She's got a lot of love to give." "I will," Maggie whispered. "She saved me as much as I saved her." The car ride home was silent except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle from Maggie. Hope sat curled up on the passenger seat, her head resting on Maggie's arm. She didn't need to look out the window. Her eyes stayed on Maggie the whole ride, as if assuring herself that this wasn't another goodbye. The house Maggie lived in wasn't big, but it was warm and filled with the scent of vanilla and old books. A cozy craftsman-style home with creaky wooden floors, an overstuffed armchair by the window, and the kind of kitchen that always had something baking. For years it had felt empty, silent even with the radio playing. But now, as Hope stepped over the threshold, nose twitching and ears alert, the house breathed again. "I set up a little spot just for you," Maggie said, leading Hope to a corner of the living room where a soft dog bed waited beside a basket filled with toys. Her old pink blanket had been carefully cleaned and folded, placed like a sacred relic atop the bed. When Hope saw it, she gave a happy bark and pulled it down with her teeth, circling 3 times before curling up on it with a contented sigh. Maggie knelt beside her, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're home now, baby girl, forever." That evening, the two sat on the porch as the sun began its descent. Hope lay at Maggie's feet, chewing on her new elephant toy, the same kind Maggie had brought to her kennel weeks ago. This one had bigger ears and a tiny heart stitched onto its chest. Neighbors walked by and waved, some stopping to admire the sweet puppy resting in Maggie's arms. Hope accepted gentle pets from a few, though she never strayed far from Maggie's side. Trust wasn't freely given yet, but it was growing, like a seed finally touched by sun after a long winter. As days turned to weeks, a beautiful rhythm developed. Morning walks around the neighborhood with Hope proudly trotting beside Maggie. Lazy afternoons reading on the porch, swing. Hope napping with her head on Maggie's lap. Visits to the park where she slowly began to play with other dogs. At first, she was hesitant, clinging to Maggie's legs like a child to a parent. But each trip brought a little more courage. One Sunday morning, as they strolled by a community fair, a group of children ran past, their laughter loud and sharp. Hope flinched and froze, her body tense. Maggie knelt beside her, whispering soothing words. Hope looked at her, those wide brown eyes searching for safety, and found it. A moment later, she continued walking, her tail flicking side to side. It was small victories like that that meant the most. On the 1-month anniversary of Hope's adoption, Maggie held a quiet celebration. She baked dog-friendly treats and wore a silly party hat. Hope got a new collar, a pastel blue one with tiny paw prints, and a framed photo of the two of them sat on the fireplace mantel. She even made a scrapbook, documenting the journey from the shelter to their new life together. But the most treasured memento remained the note that had been found tucked in with Hope on that rainy night. "I'm sorry." Maggie had preserved it in a small shadow box. Not as a reminder of the pain, but of the truth. Some people let go because they don't know how to hold on. But others find a way to hold on tighter. Hope wasn't just abandoned. She was rediscovered. As fall arrived and the leaves began to turn, Maggie and Hope often walked under canopies of amber and crimson, the world shifting into something softer. On one such walk, Maggie looked down at Hope and whispered, "Do you know how special you are?" Hope paused, then leapt into the pile of leaves beside the path, scattering them in a flurry of joy. She didn't need to answer. Her life was the response. She had been left with nothing but a blanket and a note, but now she had a home, a name, and someone who would never stop showing her that she was worthy of love. And that was more than enough.